Simon Beattie has been an antiquarian bookseller for more than 20 years, finding rare, unusual material for customers all over the world. So you found customers all over the world and unusual material all over the world.
Yes, most of my customers are in Europe and the United States, but also Australia and places like that. And finding books, I suppose if I have a business model, it's sort of find books in Europe and sell them in Britain and abroad. That's kind of how my model works. I go to France, I go to Germany regularly and buy books there. And then catalogue and I suppose set them in a sort of an Anglophone context for people.
Right, because you refer to your focus or specialty as cross-cultural.
Yes, I've always been interested in that. I studied modern languages at university, and I've always been interested to see how the English-speaking world interacts or connects with other cultures in Europe. So I'll be selling things like French translations of James Fenimore Cooper, or English translations of a Russian author or something like that, and showing how this sort of cross-cultural connections link up in a sort of historical context. I mean, obviously, nowadays everything happens so fast, or can happen so fast.
Right.
But I remember having a Russian translation of something by Charles Dickens, and it was the speed at which it had been translated and then printed in Russia was just phenomenal. It had come out in one of those sort of Christmas journals, and it had got the date when it was passed by the censor. It was only like a couple of weeks or something after it had appeared in English. I think, well, how did that happen? And then it makes you think, well, perhaps actually they were getting the text over to Russia before it came out in English, and were getting it translated because they knew there was going to be a market and want to get it out as soon as possible because he was hugely popular across Europe. Yeah. And I don't know that anyone's ever really studied that. And I kind of, that sort of thing fascinates me. These little untold stories about how stories or texts move between different countries and cultures.
So why does that fascinate you?
I think being a native English speaker, and I've always enjoyed travel and foreign languages, and I think if you speak a foreign language, then you get so much more out of that culture. I mean, I was saying to a friend of mine who's a German teacher, he said trying to get children interested in doing foreign languages, because it's not a soft option at school.
Yeah.
And I said that the thing to remember is learning foreign language is all about having a nice time. It's about going abroad. You're in a different culture. You have some nice meals abroad in France or wherever you're going, and if you speak the language, you're going to get much more out of it. You can speak to people, and then if your language ability increases, you can read their literature in the language that it was written in, and that's a buzz, rather than reading it through a translated text, which lots of people do, of course, and there's no reason why not to, but being able to actually read it in the original.
The fascination is what? Learning about how other people live?
I think I like the idea, or I'm interested in the idea that one culture is interested in another culture, and always has been. I mean, humans by nature are curious people, and if you've got that intellectual curiosity to find out what's happening in another country, and not just be in your own little world in your own country. People travel, people always have, and enjoyed that, and are fascinated by whether they find it as an exotic activity or
the exploration of the world.
Yes, exactly, that too. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So it's sort of, I suppose, linked to that. Perhaps it is just intellectual curiosity, on my part, to find out these little. I always thought this kind of footnotes to history, and when did people first discover about Gothic literature or whatever, and you get the English Romantics going to Germany and becoming fascinated by that, and then they bring it back and they go, oh wow, this is amazing, and and then it can change in their own literature or culture or music too. I mean, you get cross-fertilisation within music, and people are inspired by going and hearing different things and bringing that back with them and showing it to other people and sharing it with other people. And then it influences their own culture. And I think these things, different aspects of European culture don't just grow up in a bubble. There is all this sort of mixing. Always has been, I think.
Well, there's intermarriage too.
Oh yeah,
isn't
they
there?
call that too. Yes, well, people fall in love. I mean, they can't you can't do anything about that. Yeah, I mean, so and people can fall in love with another culture too. I mean, you read in certain people, whether it is it's this sort of perceived exoticism.
Well, the Russians spoke French.
Yes, the aristocrats did. Yeah, that's right. Yes. And of course, sometimes we're thinking about sort of translations. I mean, just because a text isn't translated into a language doesn't mean people didn't read it. So, I mean, Dutch and Polish are two very well-known examples of this. So, the Dutch have always been very good at speaking other people's languages, and Dutch translations of Scottish Enlightenment authors, for example, there aren't that many of them. But then they didn't need to, because they could read it in French or they could read it in German. And I think the Poles are the same. The Poles, they could read French, they could read German. Mm-hmm. So like Byron or someone, would probably be read perhaps in French translation by Polish aristocrats. Rather, they didn't need a Polish translation in order to appreciate it. And people, in the 19th century, you get Byron or Walter Scott. I mean, everyone was mad for it. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really just international sensations. Yeah, so it's quite nice. I can bring in my sort of interest in, I suppose, academic interest when I was at university in sort of foreign languages and different European cultures, but bring it onto looking at English literature and writing culture or music or whatever, and bring those two things together.
So this is kind of a specific area of interest. Yes. You're betting that other people are going to find this interesting because it's breaking new ground. Well,
it can do, yes, and I'm certainly, if you're selling to university libraries, for example, or even private collectors, if they have a real interest in Dickens, say, they think, well, I've done everything, we've got it all,
Right.
How can we expand that offering? And they say, well, let's look at how he was perceived abroad and those connections, and then it just supports and enriches what they may already have in their collection.
Yeah, and also the work that goes on in the classroom and research in those
exactly. Yeah. You can bring other things in and make it more inclusive, perhaps. If people, if you've got researchers, I don't know, if you've got a Russian researcher who's very interested in Oscar Wilde or something, and wants to look at the reception of Wilde in Russia. And then the influence of Wilde in Russia, because these things are then translated, and then of course they have influence on homegrown authors. Mm-hmm. They read these things and think, oh wow, this is really interesting, and they start writing in a similar manner or behaving in a certain way, and that sort of thing.
Plus, you look at what aspects of Wilde's work were translated, what works were translated, and how they were translated too. Yeah. Maybe they left certain things out or they added things.
And who the translators were. I mean, somewhere like Russia, Soviet Russia, for example, certain writers, certain poets were not allowed to publish their own work. So what they did was translation. Someone like Boris Pasternak, a classic example. Yeah.
Did that get past the censors?
That did, yeah. So we know him as Dr. Zhivago, but Russians, he is a poet first and foremost. He's not a novelist. And he sort of wasn't publishing his own work, but he translated Shakespeare, and his translation of Shakespeare is sort of like the standard Russian translation of Shakespeare now.
Shakespeare was brilliant at saying things in ways that didn't get him hauled off to the tower, right?
And Shakespeare also a classic example. The international reception and the international influence of Shakespeare is just incalculable. Mm-hmm. It's massive.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to your biography here. So you have been called one of the best in the business, and you were among the winners of the 2012 Smarta 100 awards for the most resourceful, original, exciting small businesses in the UK.
That's right, yeah.
Your catalogues have won seven?
Yeah, I think it's seven.
Seven design awards
yeah.
on both sides of the Atlantic, and of course, the famous Facebook group that you founded in 2016, We Love Endpapers, now has more than 4,000 members.
And it goes up every day. You get people literally every day. You get requests to join. So yeah, it's just constantly expanding.
So let's have a look then at Endpapers. What are they?
I mean, in terms of structure, they are part of the book structure. They're not part of the book, or rather, they're part of the binding. They're not part of the book, the published book. Certainly in the hand press period, which is my interest really.
And that is.
So before things start mechanised. So I mean, my interest in decorated paper is largely 18th century, and that's when decorated paper really sort of takes off. And looking at the different styles which one finds in 18th century books is a thing I've always been interested in. It's sort of ever since I've started in the trade, actually. I mean, I remember coming across, we had a book when I worked at Bernard Quaritch, and it goes back to what we were just saying about cross-cultural things. It was the first edition in German of Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations.
Okay.
Published, I think it's almost like, is it the same? It might be like the same year as the first edition. It was published very early on, 2-volume octavo, and it was in the most beautiful binding. It had red leather spines and corners. It had deep Prussian blue paste paper sides, and then the end paper.
What does that mean?
So paste paper. So that was a style or a means of decorating paper where the binder, particularly in Germany, was a very popular German practice. They would use the paste, which they would use for actually binding books, putting down the spine or something, and they would mix some colour in with that, and then the coloured paste can be brushed onto paper, and then the paste itself can then be manipulated with something. Either they will have a tool of some sort, they could have a roll, or they might fashion a comb and make swirls with it, or might just use their fingers. And they can make patterns with that. That was quite common. And then you would dry that and smooth it out, and that would be then your decorated paper. And that was on the outside of the book, and on the inside, on the end papers themselves, they were a block printed paper. So a different method there. You would have wooden blocks with a pattern cut on them, and they would then be inked up and then printed onto a bit like if you're doing potato prints yourself. So you cut out a shape and then stick it in some. Children, you get some paint and then you put it on some paper. Well, it's basically the same process except with cut pieces of wood.
But what the page that is pasted onto the boards?
Yes. And
the first sort of free page.
Yes.
They look the same, but you're saying they're produced differently?
No, that would be no. So it was one piece of paper. But the paste paper was on the outside of the book, and the block printed paper was used on the inside in that particular book. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But they'd used two different types of paper on the same binding. It was just very appealing. It was very unlike English books of the period that I'd seen. I'd not seen this style of decoration. I thought, wow, this is really nice. And I sort of found it, it just sort of spoke to me.
Which is really a good lesson for a collector. If something speaks to you, then pay attention to that. And
I suppose I hadn't really thought about it. That was back in probably 1998, 1999 when I first started work in the trade. And then you sort of come across these things. It was always a case of, particularly if the decorated paper is used as an end paper, you don't know it's there until you open the book. And that's kind of the pleasant surprise.
Kind of the wow.
Yeah, exactly. You take a book, you take a book off the shelf, you open it, that's nice. And there are people, other booksellers I know, or people, or collectors, and they also get a similar sort of
Like a nice surprise.
Yeah, it is a nice surprise. People would show them, say, "Oh, look at those." Or you're at a book fair, you pull a book off, and you want to share it with someone. Oh, look at this! Look at this paper.
Yeah.
And I then thought that Facebook would be a good forum for people to be able to share those discoveries.
Why not Instagram?
Facebook was the first sort of social media that I really kind of used. So that's where I have most friends and things there.
Yeah.
And then I thought also the fact you can set up a group on Facebook like that, and people then can contribute. It can be a useful forum. People can post things, and originally I just conceived it as sort of for kind of friends of mine, either in the trade or librarians or collectors, to share things that they come across. And then I thought, actually, perhaps it makes more sense to have it as an open group so anyone can join, and that has proved, as you said, phenomenally successful. So we now have well over 4,000 people in the group, and people are sharing all the time. And some people, I think, just like looking at it, that's fine.
Yeah.
But equally, it has proved a really useful resource. So there was an example of a rare book librarian in the north of England it looked like a marble paper, or some type of marble paper, and they wanted to know how was this made. And they posted a picture of it there, asked the question, and within, I think it was 2 or 3 hours, we'd had an answer from a practicing marbler in Chile with the answer. And they said, this is this type of paper. It's actually a sprinkled paper, and you do it like this, and explained the process. So we all learned something.
Right. Right.
And, it's proved a fascinating and, very useful way. People sometimes say, about crowdsourcing and how, trying to harness that knowledge, and it's proved a really, really useful way of doing that for this very specific area.
Well, plus it also, I think, it introduces people to the book as object.
Yes.
And this is a really fun way to collect books.
And another aspect of that object, isn't it? And because we're so used, certainly in Britain and probably in America too, if you think of decorative paper, most things you're going to see are going to be marble paper. Everyone has seen marble paper.
Yeah, maybe you could describe that a bit and how it's made.
Yes, I mean, the process of it. You have a tray of what's called size. It's a sort of viscous liquid, and then you the end sort of colour is distributed, inks are distributed, and then they can be manipulated in certain ways. And then you can lay the piece of paper
like
on
a
top.
comb,
or a comb, or swirls. I mean, there are plenty. If you're interested in this thing, there are plenty of videos on YouTube of people doing all these processes. So you can see them.
Yeah.
I think I remember even doing it at school once. Sort of have a go at this sort of marbling, and then you lay the paper on top, and then you pull it off, and then you have your design. I mean, obviously, it's actually much more difficult to make a nice one
right.
when it comes out looking a mess. But that's that's the type of decorated paper most people are used to seeing.
Do they? No, they don't do that for each page though. They do that, and then they'll like in the 20th century they'll just print that after they've produced it, right? Or do they do each one?
Well, you can buy printed versions, and there are machine-made papers which will copy those, and they might be printed. But there are still. I mean, there are still practicing marblers out there who are producing these wonderful things. And
again, they would, if you're going to have a run of 2,000, they would actually produce 2,000 sheets.
They could do, yeah. I mean, it depends on the size of the sheet, doesn't it? I suppose.
Sure.
And then you can buy rolls of marble paper. If you're a bookbinder, and then you cut it to the size you require for the book you're binding.
Is there a way of telling the difference between one that's printed and one that's
There might be under a microscope or something. I don't know. Marble paper is not really my great. It's not something I know a huge amount. I know a certain amount about it, obviously, but there are some very good books on the subject, which people can access, and indeed websites too. There are websites about types of marbling and history of marbling.
Okay. What other? Let's get to again the purpose. Is it purely decorative? Do you think
For marbling?
Or just end papers?
Oh, I see.
I mean, they have to hold the book together in a way.
It's helping hold the book block, the printed part of the book, in its binding. That's what it's actually. That's the purpose it's serving.
Yeah. So you have to have it.
Yes, and it's sort of holding it in place.
But it doesn't have to be beautiful.
No, it can be plain, and they often are. I mean, that's absolutely fine. But if you look at, it's interesting now. You look at just modern books. You go into a bookshop and take off a hardbound book. Children's books and cookbooks are particularly good in this area. I always think they always seem to do. The designers of these things often use the end papers and do something interesting on them. But yeah, and I think in the sort of the hand press period where then all the books are being bound by hand, and the presence of a decorated paper on the end papers shows that that the person who paid to have that book bound spent a bit more money than if they just had plain paper. And even if you don't know who that person was, there might be marks of profit or something, but you say, they obviously wanted it, and there it is purely decorative. They just wanted something there to look nice, or to look nicer than just plain paper. With the other types of paper which we often see in the group, there's brocade paper we haven't spoken about yet, that sort of embossed gilt paper sort of invented in Germany in the late 17th century and was very popular right across the world, actually. I mean, that's one of the things I find fascinating, going back to this sort of how things travel and cross-cultural things, that brocade papers were largely made in Augsburg, in one city in Germany.
Isn't that cool?
So there's known that there were about 50 brocade paper makers in the 18th century. By far and away, most of them are German.
Yeah.
And of that, 30 of them were in Augsburg, just in one centre.
Okay, so the obvious question is, why there?
Yeah, I mean, I think Augsburg has a history of craftsmen. They were very good at metalwork, sort of Renaissance metalwork and that sort of thing, engraving. So they had the people there. Who could create, because brocade paper is made using metal blocks, which are then sort of carved out into a pattern to help to make the paper.
And then impressed into the paper itself?
Yes, it's impressed underneath. So whereas on a block printed paper, you're coming, like a page print, you're coming down onto the page. Yeah. With an embossed, you put it underneath and you put it through a rolling press, as you would for an engraving, copper plate engraving or something. Okay. And that then provides the good even pressure and quite a high pressure, which then
raises it.
Yeah, exactly, and raises it like that.
I see.
But these papers, I have seen them on. Obviously, you see them on German books, but you see them in books. I don't know, end papers on a Scottish psalter in the 18th century, or you see it on as a wrapper on a Spanish pamphlet, or I've seen it on American children's books printed in Worcester, Massachusetts in the 1780s. I've seen it on a wrapper from a little legal treatise in Mexico. I've seen it on Islamic manuscripts. I mean, these things travelled. People liked them. And it's really interesting to see how far they got. When they turn up and you see them on these things.
Isn't that neat?
And because the other thing is that people see these decorated papers and you think, well, I've got this book here and it's a French book or it's a Spanish book or whatever, and you see there's a decorated paper, and then you think, well, this paper must therefore be Spanish. Well, not the case at all. This paper could have come from anywhere, really, and because
so they transported them by stagecoach or ship, or
I mean, again, Germany, I would have thought that you can imagine by river. I mean, in Britain we often call them Dutch gilt papers. That's a terminology people use, but they're not Dutch. The Dutch didn't make them. They were all made in Germany, sometimes northern Italy. There were a couple of centres in Italy that made brocade papers. But they were exported through the Netherlands, and that's why they're known as Dutch gilt.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
What about sprinkled paper? What's that?
Well, sprinkled paper is the easiest one to do. I mean, you can just imagine you get a toothbrush, and you put it in some ink, and then you spray it onto a paper.
Okay.
And that's a sprinkled paper. It's like anyone can do that. Right. So you see that a lot. I mean, that's very common. Again, in German papers, often used on the outside of things. That's common.
Right. And you mentioned paste paper.
Paste paper, yeah. So that's the one where you get those sort of swirly. And there are different ways of doing it. So they can sometimes they would put the decorated or the coloured paste on two sheets of paper. They put the two pieces of paper together.
Oh yes.
And then you pull them apart, which gives a sort of almost like a brushed look to it.
Andy Warhol was known for that kind of stuff.
Or once you've got them stuck together, you can do what's called impressed decoration. So you can make swirly patterns on the dry side of the paper, pull it apart, and then that has, where you've pressed down, it's moved the paste on the wet side, and it leaves a pattern. or you can use a block. You can use a wood block, a picture of something, and put that on the paste, which then again pushes the paste away and leaves a pattern in the paste itself.
So, are these books prohibitively expensive or not? I mean, I guess it's all over the map, right?
I don't know whether creating this Facebook group has driven the price up of these things. People are certainly much more aware of them now, I feel, in certain times. I think some are, and people, I mean, I have certainly bought some books because of the particular brocade paper. I mean, some are absolutely beautiful, particularly if they've got figures on them. I've got a wonderful one, which is basically a sort of hunting scene. And there's sort of animals all over it, and dogs running around, and there's a boar in the middle, and sort of a woman holding a falcon. I mean, it's just absolutely extraordinary. And the quality for that one, particularly in that period, that's like the first half of the 18th century. The quality was absolutely top notch, really good.
How do you determine quality?
Well, just the definition of the image is really crisp.
Okay.
And then what happens over the century, so you get late 18th century, early 19th century ones, they're slightly fuzzy. You know, the sort of the definition of the images is really not as good at all. But then fashions change. So things like the brocade papers, that's the sort of the start of the 18th century. Then block printed papers come in, and fashions change, and people like those.
Yeah.
And people were interested in that, and then paste paper that comes in slightly later again. So the fashions change, as with anything. Yeah. Fashions change. People want a certain type of binding or some type of clothing. I don't know. And so I suppose the people making these papers, they diversify in the kinds of things they're offering, and then you get to the machine-made papers in the 19th century, as with everything in the Industrial Revolution. And then they worked out, well, actually we can do this much more cheaply on an industrial scale. And then the quality sort of changes again, I suppose. And then lithography comes in, and they find they can do sorts of other things with decorated papers. It's I get people contacting me saying, can you identify where this paper was made? Well, sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, or you get a feeling for certain. If you've seen enough of them, the style of an Italian paper is different from something done in Germany or done in the Netherlands or something like that. So you can look at these things, and just because you see a decorated paper on a book from a particular country doesn't mean that the paper came from that same country. That's something that I would say that I've found it.
I love the Kerwin press and the repeating patterns that they have. And there are books. I'm trying to think. It's the Hamish Hamilton novel series.
Okay.
It was on the actual outside boards.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But they're exquisite.
Yeah.
Little pieces.
I mean, it's all to appeal to the eye, isn't it? And it appeals to the eye and therefore the mind of...
Right. Well, it's also appealing to
the reader.
Desire to possess, I suppose.
Yeah.
They're trying to make it that so difficult to not buy.
Yes. And the thing about things like brocade papers, for example, although some of them are also very beautiful, if you've got a very thin book, a pamphlet, or you get it sometimes on sort of like 18th century sermons or university dissertations, they're quite small books, thin books.
Yeah.
And if you want to give a copy of that, you're very proud of your university dissertation, and you want to give it to your friends, you want it to sort of make it look special. Well, you could take it to a binder and say, can you bind 12 copies of my dissertation?
Yeah.
Well, that's going to cost you a fair bit of money to have the binder do that, and time. But with, a nice fancy paper, it's very easy for a binder to put that on very quickly, and you immediately have a much nicer looking object than if it was just in a plain paper wrapper. So
Right.
So that's another place where you find these papers just on as a wrapper on things, and I'm sure they were just because they were given as gifts to people. Occasionally you get presentation inscriptions in things, which then proves that was the case, But I think that is something where you see that, or you see them in Germany certainly, but even on English
And you'd find these in bookstores and book fairs, or like where would you
sometimes,
find them?
well, sometimes I've just found them, not necessarily to buy, but they're available. They're in university libraries or something. They just have examples of these things. So But on the market, I mean, people sell them. Even at the here we are at Boston Book Fair. There are a number of sort of brocade paper wrappers on books at the fair.
Yeah.
On thin books. They're just actually there's little things like that. Yeah.
Right.
I've seen some there. So these things are out there.
What about again? Someone's intrigued by what you've been saying, and they wanna develop a little collection of. What's your advice, or do you have some recommendations on some sweet-looking items that don't cost very much?
I think that if it's just the paper you're interested in, then you probably can get very attractive examples quite well. I say cheaply. I mean, what cheap? I mean, I suppose a little 18th century. It'll be some Latin legal dissertation or something, which most people, or many people, may not find very interesting, or may not be able to read either. A German legal dissertation with a nice wrapper on it. I mean, that might be kind of, my starting price is going to be €200-300 maybe for that. Mm-hmm. And if they're really nice papers, then you're sort of getting up to sort of maybe four figures.
Okay. What about two figures?
Well, you might do. I mean, some block printed ones you might do. Yes. Maybe there's some 19th century block printed ones. I mean, what's actually one thing. It's sometimes difficult to find them online because there isn't like a consistent terminology. I mean, some booksellers just say
pattern paper
or decorative paper wrappers, which you could put that into one of the websites and see what comes up. And then of course the bookseller may or may not have illustrated it, so you can't see what it looks like. So actually going to a book fair is probably the best thing, isn't it? Actually, you get an opportunity to see different things. But you could probably start maybe with sort of two-figure things. But as I said, booksellers do look out for this and do like them. These decorated papers. So, and for some of the books, it won't necessarily affect. I mean, it won't detract from the value of a book. I don't know if it will add. It really depends on the paper, because some papers are just absolutely stunning and kind of. I think the booksellers are selling it because of the paper, not because of the content, and sometimes actually they're selling it because of the content of the book, and it just happens to have a nice wrapper on it. So it's like that's like a bonus.
Wrapper? Are you using that interchangeably with endpapers?
So endpapers will be on a bound book, so on the inside, whereas a wrapper is just like a paperback, so it's just wrapped round the text block. There wouldn't be a spine on it, or it would not from made of cloth or leather or anything like that. It's just paper wrapped around the whole thing.
Wrapped around the text block.
Yes. So a wrapper
before it's been actually bound.
Well, that is its binding. It's just got a paper wrapper.
So
which
it's
is protecting.
like a paperback.
Yes. Sort of four. I suppose it's kind of forerunner of a paperback.
Okay.
Whereas a bound book, if they've actually sewn cords into the book to bind, to put in a binding with boards, and then the boards are covered with something, whether it's leather or paper, and then that will have end papers to help hold the book block in. But as a wrapper, so you get decorative papers as wrappers, and you get them being used as end papers, or indeed on the sides of books. You see that too.
Well, speaking of design and decoration, you're renowned for these catalogues.
Yeah.
These oversized, are they all oversized catalogues?
The ones we've done, we've done 6 in total, and they've all been that sort of size.
Yeah, what do you call that? Elephant?
You've just got a photo with you in it. I guess it's a bit like a newspaper.
Kind of a tabloid.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Okay.
The idea behind these was really to do something a bit different.
Yeah, you're really giving pride of place to the image of the
exactly.
books.
And book design has changed a lot, and there's so much you can do with book design. Whereas actually, sort of at this point, when I started 10 years ago, the booksellers' catalogues really hadn't changed. I mean, you would look at something from 100 years before, and they were basically the same, sort of lists of books and some prices, perhaps with some illustrations.
Yeah.
And
a story of each book.
Of course, and the description. But I mean, I thought that if you look at the sorts of like exhibition catalogues or something like that, things that like rare book libraries might produce, they're much more immediately visually appealing, perhaps. And I liked that, so I wanted to do something different. Also, the other thing I thought of was that, how do I just on my own, tell the world that I've set up my business and this is what I'm doing.
Yes.
How to try and stand out.
Yeah.
So that was the other thing, working with a designer.
I mean, I've never seen one like that before.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember the second one had a bright orange cover with a big 2 on it.
Yeah.
I had a nice email from a librarian in America when that came out, and he was ordering a book, and he said, I don't know who your designer is, but it worked. Because they must get, they get half a dozen catalogues a day, and most of them would be sort of octavo size or perhaps quarto or something. And then there was this large sort of tabloid.
Where do we put this?
And I thought, what's that? And it makes but it makes you want to pick it up. That's because it does stand out.
Well, that's what's driving it. What's driving it is you want to get attention for these books and to sell them. Yeah,
exactly. And that worked hands down. I mean, they were all very successful commercially.
You mentioned 90%.
Yeah. Oh yeah, easily. Yeah.
But how many books did you have in there?
Each one has only actually got 25 books in it. Yeah. So it wasn't very, very many.
Right.
It was a sort of slight high risk enterprise, but no, it paid off, and people then sort of know me for those. We haven't done one for a couple of years actually, but we'll do one again at some point. Well, I've got a new catalogue out for my 10th anniversary, which is going to be in January. That's much more traditional because it's a much bigger catalogue.
I see. Okay.
So that'd be more traditional.
Well, you've already made the splash. People know you now.
Yeah. So it's wow. It was fun. It was fun to do it, and it got people looking.
Well, the other thing is that seeing these lovely books, like really in your face, I think really does make you want to hold them.
Yeah, well, we're very lucky with the printers we use, so it really did. They do sort of pop off the page.
Who's the printer?
That one, we use different printers for different one. That one was actually a local printer to me, funny enough, in Gerrards Cross in Buckinghamshire, just by chance. It was someone who the designer knew, and had worked with before, so he knew that they would, do a good job.
So, what was the feedback? Like, why did it work? Did you get any of that?
I mean, really, it was kind of. I just think doing something a bit different, but I did definitely want to do a printed catalogue.
Yes.
I mean, I still do, and I, regularly send out just sort of PDF e-lists of recent acquisitions. We send one out about once a month, I suppose. But I kind of wanted to. I mean, people interested in books also like physical catalogues.
Yeah, it makes sense.
They're book people. They like to hold something and have it, and you can read it on the train, and it lasts long. I mean, I think there are now particularly so many electronic catalogues that come out every week. Your inbox is full of them, and they are slightly ephemeral. I mean, I do find that an e-list only really lasts kind of 48 hours, and then it's it, because other things have happened in people's email. Whereas something like this, that can lie on a desk and then someone might pick it up later or give it to somebody else.
Yeah.
Or look at it, a week later, they're having a cup of coffee and just to look through this catalogue again. And kind of enjoy enjoy leafing through a printed matter.
Yeah.
Which doesn't happen with electronic catalogues.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another added benefit from sort of maintaining the tradition of producing printed catalogues.
So do you have a little set of criteria then that these were supposed to meet?
The idea behind it, and we called them shortlists, which was a kind of tongue-in-cheek because they're actually very tall lists.
They are big lists.
But the idea was that they were sort of, the things in them were kind of selected. I mean, if you talk about a shortlist of anything, it's there was a big group of stuff, and you've selected, you've shortlisted something.
Yeah.
And these are the things that I would like you, the customer, to have a look at.
These are the best.
So that was the idea behind it.
Isn't that interesting?
As a sort of concept, I suppose.
So, but just the very name of it, the name of it is going to make an impression.
So that was the idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it worked. So.
I just said that I'd never seen anything like it before, and you, in fact, I think, use those or similar words to describe your criteria again for acquiring books.
Oh yeah, the sort of tagline: the books you never knew you wanted.
And stuff you've never seen before.
Yes. Yeah, well, that and that came again, as I said earlier, the sort of footnotes to history thing. I mean, I don't tend to sell, first editions of books you've heard of.
No, that's pretty easy, isn't it?
But it's easy. I mean, it's quite hard because you've got lots of people selling them. So you've got
what
competition.
I mean is, if you've got enough money, you can get them.
Oh, I see. Yes, perhaps. But for me, coming at it, I enjoy the research aspect. And actually finding out, digging into the history of the things that we sell and writing the descriptions. It's kind of being a bit of an academic butterfly. You're presented, you have a book before you on the desk, you want to find out what you can about the author, where the book fits in their career, what else was going on at the time, nationally, internationally, how does it fit in with everything else, with printed matter or current events or whatever. And then you read around the subject and you sort of try and distill all that into your catalogue description. So
what comes first though is like you've got to find these books before you do the research, or do you do the research that helps you find?
I would see. Oh yeah, you can go that way around, but it's more likely the former. So like if you're going around a book fair or something, or you're in a bookshop. And you go along and you something catches your eye. That might be something physical about the book that first catches you. It's red, I don't know, and whatever it is that makes you take the book off the shelf and piques your interest in some way. And then sort of thinking, well, that ties in with what I know about something else or something about the book itself. Is it an early example of lithography or the way something's been printed or the typography behind it or something about it that sort of sparks something in you, has a sort of reaction, and then
how do you develop those antennae?
I think it's just over time, isn't it? I mean, everyone, booksellers, collectors, whoever, is going to have their own interests, of course, and they're going to be knowledgeable about certain things, and so you go round something like a fair with that knowledge. And you see something, well, I know about that. I know about music from that period, and this is unusual because this is not what you're expecting to see, and whatever it might be. And that's what I think that's what you're bringing to it. And the things that I look for tend to be, sort of cultural history. So it's literature or music or the arts and that kind of thing. Whereas someone else might come at it because their background is in science, and so they're interested in the history of science, and they're going out and say, well, that's interesting because someone hadn't thought about electricity at that point, or whatever. I don't know.
So you're able then, you develop this interesting explanation of why this is different and unusual. What you're banking on is that someone who's buying these books is going to say that is going to think the same thing, and then it can be taught in a new way, I mean certainly if you're dealing with like university libraries or something, that's where most of your sales come from.
A vast majority, and they're looking for things they can use for exhibitions or for teaching purposes, or something that's got some sort of research value. They can give it to a grad student and say, here's a project.
Yeah.
No one has looked at this thing before.
That's right. And this would be a good PhD because, as you say, it's breaking new ground.
Exactly.
And that's what they have to do.
And that's exciting for the student as well. I think that no one has actually really looked at this, if it's a manuscript or something.
Yeah.
No one's ever done it. It is absolutely fresh.
It's a bit like the explorers of the New World. This is what you're
we're going out and looking for things. Yeah, it's or people going out. The sort of the great sort of plant hunters or whatever it is. You're sort of going out and bringing these things back, sort of shining a light on it, I suppose, and saying, hey, look at this. This is interesting, and hopefully people will pause and consider and think about buying it. Yeah.
Just finally, obviously this idea of breaking into new territory and just discovering new areas of possible research, and the fact that books are kind of proof of this. Mm-hmm. What is it that got you about books? I mean, other than maybe it was just an accident that you got into the business. But
it was a complete accident, yeah.
But what is it that kept you doing this?
Oh, I see. I always wanted to do something with books, and I thought probably it might be in publishing or something like that.
And why that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't really know. I've never given pause to why do I like books? I just go with it. That's just part of who I am, and I grew up. I've read a lot as a child, and I've just always been surrounded by books, and I've always sort of treated them well physically, and I always sort of was always sort of growing up was very annoyed if it managed to get a crease in the spine of paper. That used to really sort of really bug me. I've always been interested in books, and I've always been interested in sort of old things. I mean, history, I suppose. But I'd never really considered that there was a job or a business out there that brought those two things together. So it was just complete by chance. I saw an advert in the Times in London, actually, for a job working at Quaritch back in 1998, and I applied, and I got the job, and I will ever be thankful to the people who gave me a job and gave me my start, and it just sort of developed from there. And I often say to people, I fell into it, but I was very happy where I fell, and I've just been very fortunate that I've always really enjoyed going to work every day.
That's great.
And it's endlessly fascinating. There is something new every day. Mm-hmm. You're learning all the time. You're handling these objects. And one thing that has come out of it, I thought the other day, is my concept of history is so much better. And not just because you're learning about history, like reading a textbook and learning about what happened when and dates and things, but actually because you're holding these objects. If someone just mentions, says 18th century France, well, I can picture what a binding, what the typography, what the illustrations are, so therefore dress at that period is like. Mm-hmm. I can visualise that because I've held it, and so that is one thing I've thought it a number of times over the years that that's a sort of a benefit I wouldn't have ever considered of like spending time with old books, but actually yes, that's a sort of something that has just grown. And
so is that what it helps to put you to actually be there?
I think so, because you
be in the life, live the lives.
Yeah, or sort of passport to the past or whatever. All sort of but it does offer a way into that, which you don't just get like reading a history book. I mean, similarly, if you go to a museum and you see real objects, but you can't touch those. Whereas these, we do handle them, we hold them, we read them, and you're getting that experience. I mean, actually, from reading point of view, you're getting the reading experience of someone in the 18th century or something.
Yeah.
And that's different. The way a text is produced on a printed page will have an impact on you, the reader. And we just talked about the catalogues. How do you present things to grab people's attention? Well, if you read a text in a modern paperback, perhaps very small print on a large page is different from reading Jane Austen novel in first edition where the type is quite large in ratio to the page size. So for that, for example, it means that if you read the pages, you're actually physically turning the pages more often.
Yes, yeah.
So it's literally a page turner. Whereas sometimes I think if you book, you think, God, this book's heavy going, and you hold it up and you work out how many pages you've read. But
it's kind of rewarding, more rewarding,
absolutely.
because look what I read today.
Yeah, and it helps give. I mean, in that instance, it helps give a bit of drive through the novel or something. You know, whereas you might think, oh dear, it's taking me ages to read this book.
Right.
And it might just be because...
Look how much further I've got to go.
I know, it's very depressing. Or it could be, if you're not really enjoying it, you know.
Right.
And that's a difference, you know, and you can get... That's another experience you get through, you know, working with old books and reading old books. Actually, you know, reading a text in a way as it first appeared after the author had written it, you know. And that's a buzz, you know.
You want to keep doing the same thing, just it's so good, or do you have any ambitions to do more, or do things differently, or?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm as I said, I'm very happy.
Yeah, great.
I enjoy what I do, and I enjoy travel. And I come to the US regularly and see customers here. It's always nice. I mean, you're dealing with nice people.
Yeah, you are. Book people are decent,
You know,
interesting,
exactly.
nice people.
So you know, it's why should I want to change it? Yeah.
Great. Well, don't change.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Thank
taking
you,
the time to talk.
Nice to speak to you.
I've been speaking with Simon Beattie, who is the proprietor of
Simon Beattie Limited.
And people can visit your website simply at...
It's www.simonbeattie.co.uk.
Very good. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.